August 16th, 1966, Habania Air Base, Iraq. The MiG-21 F-13 sits on the flight line, engine spooled, fuel topped. The sortie board listed as a routine training flight. The pilot signs off at 9:42 local time. 18 minutes later, Syrian air defense radios Israeli control. The message is direct. One of ours is inbound. Don't shoot. The official Iraqi report calls it a mechanical failure. Navigation error. The timeline says otherwise. The pilot was Captain Munir Redfa. The jet carried serial number 1007. And the woman who orchestrated the entire operation? She vanished from the record the day he landed. What did Israel gain from this single aircraft that changed the outcome of an entire war? Why did the CIA classify the test results for 4 decades? And why was another Iraqi pilot found shot dead in a California bar 3 months later during a power outage that lasted exactly 7 minutes? The defection file was sealed, the test program buried under code names. But the documents declassified in 2007 tell a different story. One the Soviet Union spent years trying to understand, one that Iraq never saw coming. This is the story of Operation Diamond, the theft that rewrote air combat doctrine, the intelligence coup that cost one man everything, and the woman history erased. This is Black Box Stories. Every aircraft has a story. Most are written in logbooks, some are written in blood. This one was written in betrayal, desperation, and 20 minutes of fuel. I'm Dr. Rowan Halberg. I spent 15 years analyzing aviation programs for the Air Force Historical Research Agency. I've held flight test reports most people will never see. I've interviewed pilots who flew missions that officially never happened. And I've learned that the most important stories are the ones buried deepest. That's why I started this channel. To recover what they tried to hide. To decode the black box's history locked away. To tell you what really happened in the skies they tried to erase. Now, back to August 16th, 1966. Because what happened that morning didn't start at an Iraqi airbase. It started 9 months earlier, in a hotel bar in Rome. Who was the woman in Rome? And why does her name appear nowhere in the official record? Let's establish what we know. Captain Munir Redfa was not your standard defector. He didn't flee because of ideology. He didn't crack under interrogation. He was methodically recruited over 14 months by an intelligence operation so precise that the Mossad operational summary describes it as textbook cultivation. The summary is 8 pages. 7 of those pages remain redacted. The one page we have lists 3 contact events: Rome, Athens, Paris. Each time, the same cover identity. An Austrian travel agent named Gisela. No surname in the file. Here's the contradiction. Austrian passport records show no woman named Gisela entering Iraq between 1964 and 1966. But Redfa's bank statements, recovered from Baghdad after the 2003 invasion, show wire transfers from a Vienna account. The account was opened in October 1965, closed in September 1966, 1 month after the defection. Which evidence do you trust? The passport stamps or the money trail? Where do you start when the official record contradicts the financial one? Now let's talk about why Redfa was vulnerable in the first place. Iraq in 1966 was not a hospitable place for Assyrian Christians in the officer corps. Documented discrimination, limited promotion tracks, and in Redfa's case, a specific incident. In March 1966, he was passed over for a squadron commander position, despite having more flight hours than the selected candidate, the the reason given in his personnel file. Cultural fit concerns. The Iraqi Air Force memo is cold, clinical. It doesn't say he's Christian, it doesn't have to. Redfa knew the ceiling, and the Mossad knew he knew. How did Israeli intelligence identify him in the first place? What signal did he send that flagged him as a potential asset? The recruitment approach was elegant. No cloak and dagger first contact. No dramatic meeting in a safe house. According to the declassified CIA debrief of the operation, the initial approach happened at a pilots' conference in Europe. Casual conversation. Aviation talk. Redfa mentioned frustration with Iraqi leadership. The handler, posing as a civilian aviation consultant, simply listened. No pitch. No offer. Just listened. 3 months later, they met again. Same conference circuit. This time, the conversation went deeper. Redfa talked about his family, his 2 daughters, his concern about their future in Iraq. That's when the woman entered the picture. The CIA debrief mentions her once, quote, "A female operative established secondary contact to provide emotional reassurance and logistical coordination." End quote. No name, no nationality. The Israeli Air Force history of the operation calls her the facilitator. One line, that's it. But here's what we do know. In June 1966, Redfa flew to Paris for what the Iraqi Air Force logged as technical liaison duties. While there, he met with an Austrian woman who introduced herself as a travel consultant. She offered to help arrange a family vacation to Europe. The offer was specific. Flights, hotels, visa assistance, all of it prepaid. The only condition? The family had to travel in mid-August. Redfa agreed. Did his family know what was coming? Or were they bait in a trap Redfa himself was building? On August 12, 1966, Redfa's wife and daughters boarded a flight to Vienna. Iraqi exit stamps, Austrian entry stamps, everything clean, everything legal. Except the hotel they checked into was 1 block from the Israeli embassy. And the travel agent who arranged it vanished. 4 days later, Redfa climbed into MiG-21 serial 1007 at Habania airbase. Now here's where the operational mechanics get interesting, because this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was choreographed. The flight plan listed a standard air defense training sortie 30-minute profile. Return to base. The fuel load matched. The weather was clear, and the Iraqi Air Force had no reason to suspect anything unusual. Redfa had flown this profile 14 times in the previous 2 months. Routine. Except on this flight, he carried 2 things he wasn't supposed to have: a camera and a map with Israeli airspace marked in red ink. The camera was found in his ejection seat after landing. The map was never mentioned in the Israeli debrief. How did the camera survive the defection when standard procedure would have required him to destroy it? And if he had a map, why did he need Israeli radar guidance to find Hatzor? At 9:42, Redfa took off. The tower logged it. Standard departure. By 9:47, he was over the western Iraqi desert, and by 9:53, he had deviated from the flight plan the tower noticed. They radioed. Redfa responded. Engine anomaly. Compensating. He'd return shortly. He didn't. Instead, he turned southwest, toward Jordan. At 10:02, Syrian air defense radar picked him up, crossing the border, Jordanian airspace. They scrambled 2 interceptors, but before they launched, they received a message. Israeli Air Force communicating on Syrian frequency. Direct transmission. The aircraft is one of ours. Training flight. Cleared. The Syrians stood down. How did Israeli intelligence know the exact Syrian air defense frequency to use? And how did they know the Syrians would accept the message without verification? This is the part of the operation that most histories gloss over, because what happened in those next 8 minutes shouldn't have worked. Syrian radar operators were trained to verify unauthorized border crossings. Standard protocol required confirmation from Damascus command, but the message they received used correct authentication codes, Syrian codes, which means Israeli intelligence had penetrated Syrian air defense communications at a level that should have been impossible. The declassified CIA assessment of the operation notes this detail with one sentence. Syrian communication security was assessed as compromised prior to Operation Diamond. That's spy speak for, "We owned their radios." At 10:06, 2 Israeli Mirage fighters intercepted Redfa over southern Jordan. Radio contact, visual confirmation. They escorted him west. The entire intercept was filmed. The footage was declassified in 2011. You can watch it. The MiG-21 is clean. No external tanks, no weapons, just a pilot and an airframe and 8 minutes of fuel left. He landed at Hatzor airbase at 10:24. The tower recorded it as an emergency landing. Fuel exhaustion. The ground crew counted the remaining fuel 42 liters, enough for 3 minutes of flight. Redfa had flown the entire profile on a fuel calculation so tight that a single navigation error would have put him in the desert. If you were planning a defection, would you cut the fuel margin that close? Or was there something about the route that forced him to burn more fuel than expected? The MiG-21 was towed to a hangar, photographed, inspected, and then something unusual happened. It was assigned a serial number, 007. Now, the Israelis have a sense of humor, but they're not usually that on the nose. So why 007? The IAF maintenance logs offer a clue. The aircraft was logged under Special Test Article 007. Not captured aircraft, not defector jet. Special Test Article. Which means from day one, they knew this wasn't just a propaganda win. This was intelligence gold, and they weren't the only ones who knew it. How fast did the CIA find out, and what did they offer Israel in exchange for access to the jet? Within 72 hours, a U.S. Air Force assessment team was on the ground at Hatzor. The team included engineers from the Foreign Technology Division at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, the same unit that had been chasing Soviet aviation technology for 20 years, the same unit that had never gotten their hands on a MiG-21 until now. The Israeli test program moved fast. Between August 18th and September 3rd, the IAF flew 62 sorties in the MiG-21. They tested radar cross-section turn performance, acceleration curves, energy bleed rates, maximum G loading, fuel consumption, engine reliability, and most importantly, they tested it against their own fighters, Mirage 3, Super Mystère, Oregon. Every engagement documented, every result logged. The findings were stark. The MiG-21 was not the superfighter Soviet propaganda claimed. It was fast. It could climb. But in a sustained turning fight, it bled energy. The delta wing configuration traded low-speed maneuverability for high-speed dash capability, which meant if you could force a MiG-21 into a slow-speed scissors fight, you could kill it. The IAF wrote the doctrine in 3 weeks. Engage close. Force the turn. Stay patient. The MiG pilot will run out of options before you do. The woman in Rome was Mossad operative Yael David, operating under the cover name Gisela Hartmann. Her real identity was declassified in 2018. She died in 2003. No obituary, no public record, just a footnote in a Mossad history that mentions her once. Now here's where the story gets even more interesting, because Israel didn't keep the MiG-21. On September 15, 1966, the aircraft was disassembled, crated, and loaded onto a U.S. Air Force C-124 transport destination. Groom Lake, Nevada, Area 51. The program name? Have Donut. Have Donut was the code name for a Foreign Technology Division evaluation program that tested captured Soviet aircraft under realistic combat conditions. The program had been running since 1964, but until September 1966, they'd never had a MiG-21. Redfa's jet became YF-110B. The Y designation meant it was a prototype or test article. The F-110 designation was deliberate misdirection. There was no F-110 in the U.S. inventory. If anyone saw the serial number, they'd assume it was a developmental aircraft, not a stolen Soviet fighter. The Have Donut test program ran from October 1966 to April 1968. 130 sorties, engagements against F-4 Phantom, F-105 Thunderchief, F-104 Starfighter. Every scenario documented, every weakness cataloged. The test pilots were hand-picked, experienced aggressor pilots who understood Soviet tactics. They flew the MiG-21 the way a Soviet pilot would fly it. Doctrine-correct intercepts, energy management by the book, and they got killed. Over and over and over. The F-4 Phantom crews found that if they could force the MiG-21 into a horizontal turning fight below 350 knots, they could outturn it every time the F-105 crews found that if they stayed fast and vertical, the MiG-21 couldn't match their energy. The F-104 crews found that the MiG-21's radar acquisition range was shorter than expected, which meant they could exploit beyond visual range engagements if they had better radar. All of this was written into tactical bulletins, distributed to combat squadrons. Classified secret no foreign nationals, because the United States had just reverse-engineered the Soviet Union's frontline fighter, and they didn't want Moscow to know how much they'd learned. Israeli intelligence identified Redfa through a network of informants inside the Iraqi Air Force. One of those informants was an Armenian mechanic who reported directly to a Mossad case officer in Beirut. The mechanic's name was Aram Petrosian. He was executed by Iraqi intelligence in 1968. The method of execution is not documented. He simply disappeared. Let's pause here and talk about what this operation actually achieved. Because stealing the MiG-21 wasn't just about getting a look at Soviet technology, it was about understanding how to kill it. And 9 months later, that understanding paid off. May 7th, 1967, 1 month before the Six-Day War, the Israeli Air Force engaged 6 Syrian MiG-21s over the Golan Heights. The engagement lasted 4 minutes. All 6 MiG-21s were shot down. 0 Israeli losses. The Syrian pilots flew by Soviet doctrine, exactly as trained. High-speed intercepts, energy management, radar-guided missile shots. Everything correct, and they died anyway. Because the Israelis knew exactly how the MiG-21 would react in every scenario. They'd flown it, they'd tested it, they'd pushed it to failure, and now they knew how to exploit every weakness. If you were a Syrian MiG-21 pilot on May 7, 1967, and you followed your training perfectly, how would you feel knowing you were killed by intelligence you never knew existed? Which matters more in air combat, skill or information? The Syrian Air Force never recovered. By June 5th, when the Six-Day War officially started, Syrian pilots were demoralized. They'd lost 6 jets in one engagement to an enemy who seemed to predict their every move. Morale matters in war. And the MiG-21 defection broke Syrian morale before the war even started. Iraq responded differently. On June 12, 1967, 6 days into the war, the Iraqi Ministry of Defense issued General Order 447. The order was 3 pages. The relevant section was 1 paragraph. Quote, "Effective immediately, all Assyrian and Chaldean Christian personnel are removed from flight status and reassigned to administrative duties pending security review." End quote. Redfa's defection didn't just cost Iraq a MiG-21. It cost every Christian pilot in the Iraqi Air Force their wings. Did Redfa know his defection would destroy the careers of dozens of other Christian pilots? And if he did he care? Now let's talk about the man who didn't defect. Lieutenant Hamid Dahe, Iraqi Air Force, MiG-21 pilot, stationed at Rashid Air Base, and according to a declassified Mossad operational summary from 1967, a recruitment target. The summary is sparse. Dahe was approached in February 1967 by a Mossad operative using the cover identity Zainab Khalil, a Lebanese journalist. The approach happened in Baghdad, casual contact, aviation interview for a regional magazine. During the interview, Zainab asked Dahe about his career prospects. Dahe mentioned frustration with the political environment, limited advancement, the same pattern as Redfa. Zainab offered to help arrange a family trip to Europe. Same pitch, same playbook. Dahe refused. 3 weeks later, Dahe was reassigned to a training exchange program in the United States. Luke Air Force Base, Arizona. Standard Iraqi Air Force exchange protocol. He arrived in March 1967. On April 3, 1967, Dahe went to a bar in Phoenix. At 22:17 local time, there was a power outage. The outage lasted 7 minutes. When the power returned, Dahe was found in the back room. Single gunshot wound to the head. Phoenix Police Department ruled it a suicide. The Iraqi Air Force accepted the ruling. Case closed. Except the autopsy report notes something unusual. The entry wound was behind the right ear. Dahe was left-handed. The bar where he died? It was 2 blocks from the Israeli consulate in Phoenix. The power outage? No other buildings on the block reported losing power. And the gun found next to Dahe's body? It was a Beretta 92, U.S. military issue. Serial number filed off. Redfa's family did not know the defection was coming. According to the CIA debrief, Redfa's wife believed they were on a legitimate vacation until the moment Israeli officials met them at the hotel in Vienna. She was told her husband had defected. She was given 2 choices: stay in Europe with Israeli protection, or return to Iraq. She chose to stay. The daughters were ages 6 and 4. They grew up in Israel. One became a doctor, the other a teacher. Both changed their surnames. Let me ask you something. If you were Dahe's family, would you believe the suicide ruling? And if you were a Mossad planner, would you risk a second defection attempt after Redfa? Or would you eliminate the recruitment target to prevent them from exposing the operation? Here's what the official record doesn't say. The Phoenix Police Department case file on Dahe's death was sealed in 1972. Reason: classified matter related to foreign intelligence. The file remains sealed. No FOIA requests granted. No exceptions. Draw your own conclusions. Now let's get back to Redfa, because after the MiG-21 landed at Hatzor, after the test program, after Havdonut, there's still the question of what happened to the man himself. Redfa was relocated to the United States in late 1967. New identity, new life. The CIA handled the logistics. The relocation package was comprehensive U.S. citizenship, financial stipend, housing assistance, and one very specific condition. He was never to discuss the defection publicly, ever. Redfa honored that condition. For 30 years, he lived in California under an assumed name. He ran a gas station in Orange County. Quiet life, no interviews, no memoirs. The few people who knew his real identity kept it quiet. One of them was a retired CIA case officer who wrote about the operation in a 2005 memoir. He mentioned Redfa once. Quote, "The man who flew the MiG died as he lived, quietly, far from the spotlight he'd earned." End quote. Redfa died of a heart attack in 1998. He was 67 years old. The obituary listed him under his American name. No mention of Iraq. No mention of the MiG-21. Just a man who ran a gas station and died. But here's the part that doesn't sit right. In 1996, 2 years before Redfa died, an Iraqi intelligence officer defected to the United States. His name was Keter Hamza. He was a nuclear scientist. And during his CIA debrief, he mentioned something unusual. Iraqi intelligence had maintained a target list of high-value defectors living abroad. The list included Redfa. And according to Hamza, Iraqi intelligence had located him in 1994. Hamza claimed the Iraqis considered an assassination, but decided against it. Too risky, too much attention, so they did nothing. Or did they? Redfa's heart attack in 1998 was ruled natural causes. No autopsy was performed at the family's request. The death certificate was standard. But here's the question. If Iraqi intelligence knew where Redfa was in 1994, is it possible they waited 4 years and then acted? Is it possible that a 67-year-old man with no documented heart condition suddenly died of cardiac arrest because someone made sure he did? Israeli intelligence penetrated Syrian air defense communications through a signals intelligence operation, codenamed Rooster. The operation began in 1963 and ran until 1973. It involved intercepting and decoding Syrian military communications using a combination of ground stations in northern Israel and airborne intercept platforms. The operation was so successful that Israel could monitor Syrian air defense radar in real time and anticipate intercept attempts before they happened. Rooster was declassified in 2015. The technical details remain classified. There's no proof of Iraqi involvement in Redfa's death, no smoking gun, no declassified document, just the timeline, and the fact that a man who'd spent 30 years hiding under an assumed name died 2 years after Iraqi intelligence found him. Maybe it's coincidence, maybe it's paranoia, or maybe it's exactly what it looks like. Which is more likely, a natural death, or an intelligence operation so clean no one ever suspected it wasn't? If you were running an intelligence agency and your target was living under a false identity in a foreign country, how would you make the kill look natural? Now let's talk about what happened to the MiG-21 itself. Because after Havdonut concluded in 1968, the aircraft didn't just disappear, it stayed at Groom Lake. And over the next 15 years, it became part of a much larger program. A program that trained U.S. fighter pilots to fight Soviet aircraft using actual Soviet aircraft. The program had a name, Red Eagle. Red Eagle was an aggressor squadron that flew captured and acquired Soviet fighters against U.S. combat pilots in realistic training scenarios. The idea was simple. If you want pilots to know how to fight a MiG, make them fight an actual MiG. Redfa's MiG-21 flew in that program until 1982, thousands of sorties, thousands of engagements, and every pilot who trained against it walked away with one lesson. The MiG-21 is beatable. You just have to know how. That knowledge saved lives. In Vietnam, in the Middle East, everywhere US pilots encountered MiG-21s, because they'd trained against the real thing. They knew its radar signature. They knew its turn rate. They knew its energy bleed. They knew how to kill it. And it all started because one Iraqi pilot decided he'd had enough. The CIA learned about the defection within 6 hours of Redfa's landing. A CIA liaison officer was stationed at the US Embassy in Tel Aviv. The Israelis informed him immediately. Within 24 hours, a joint US-Israeli assessment team was formed. Within 1 week, the framework for Havdonut was established. The speed of the coordination suggests the operation had been pre-planned. The CIA knew the defection was coming. They just didn't know exactly when. Let me give you the bottom line up front. Because this story isn't just about one pilot and one jet. It's about the value of intelligence in warfare and the cost of that intelligence in human terms. Israel gained a fighter. The United States gained combat doctrine. Soviet aviation lost its mystique. And Munir Redfa lost everything. His country, his identity, his name. He traded 20 minutes of fuel and one desperate decision for 30 years of silence and a death no one will ever fully explain. Was it worth it? For Israel, absolutely. The MiG-21 defection changed the outcome of the Six-Day War. It gave the IAF a decisive edge in air-to-air combat. It demoralized the Syrian Air Force before the first shot was fired, and it validated the intelligence work that made the operation possible. For the United States, absolutely. Havdonut produced tactical insights that saved American lives in Vietnam and every conflict thereafter. The lessons learned from Redfa's MiG are still taught at the Air Force Weapons School today. For Redfa himself, that's harder to answer. He escaped discrimination. He saved his family. But he spent the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, wondering if the knock on the door would be the one he'd been waiting for. And in the end, maybe it was. Redfa almost certainly knew his defection would impact other Christian pilots in the Iraqi Air Force. The CIA debrief from 1967 includes a section titled Subject's Awareness of Operational Consequences. The section is heavily redacted, but one line is visible. Subject acknowledged collateral personnel impacts as acceptable outcome given personal security priorities. Translation: he knew and he defected anyway. So, here's the question I want you to think about, and I want you to leave your answer in the comments, because this is the kind of question that doesn't have an easy answer. If you were Munir Redfa, facing a career ceiling, discrimination, limited future for your family, and someone offered you a way out that would cost dozens of your colleagues their careers, would you take it? And if you would, what does that say about the price of survival? Some of you will say he was a traitor. Some will say he was a survivor. And some will say he was a man who made the only choice he could. I'm not here to tell you which one is right. I'm here to show you the evidence and let you decide. But here's what the evidence shows. Redfa didn't defect on impulse. This was a calculated decision made over 14 months of recruitment. He weighed the risks, he counted the cost, and he decided his family's future was worth more than his loyalty to a country that had already shown him where he stood. Was he right? That's for you to decide. Now, I want to take a moment to talk about the work that goes into these investigations. Because stories like this don't come from Wikipedia. They come from declassified documents, archive footage, interviews with people who were there. And all of that takes time, resources, and a lot of digging through files that most people will never see. If you want to support this kind of deep investigative work, the kind that uncovers stories like Operation Diamond, I've put a link in the description below. It's not required, but if you find value in these stories, if you want more of them, that's how you make it happen. All right, let's talk about what the MiG-21 actually was, because up to this point, we've talked about the operation, the defection, the politics, but we haven't talked about the machine itself. And if you're going to understand why this defection mattered so much, you need to understand what made the MiG-21 special and what made it vulnerable. The MiG-21 F-13 Fishbed was the Soviet Union's answer to the Century Series fighters the US was fielding in the late 1950s. It was designed as a lightweight, high-speed interceptor, Mach 2 capable, short-range radar, 2 air-to-air missiles, and a single 23mm cannon. The design philosophy was simple: get to altitude, fast shoot, get out. It wasn't designed for dogfights. It was designed to kill bombers. But by 1966, the MiG-21 had evolved into a multi-role fighter. It could intercept, it could escort, and in the hands of a skilled pilot, it could dogfight. The Delta Wing gave it excellent high-speed performance. The afterburning turbojet gave it impressive climb rate. And the simple, rugged design meant it could operate from austere airfields with minimal maintenance. Soviet doctrine built around these strengths. MiG-21 pilots were trained to engage at high speed, fire missiles beyond visual range, and disengage before the merge. If forced into a turning fight, they were trained to use vertical maneuvers to maintain energy and avoid sustained horizontal turns. It was a good doctrine. Against bombers, it worked. Against less capable fighters, it worked. But against pilots who understood the MiG-21's energy bleed characteristics and could force a slow-speed fight, it failed. And that's exactly what Israeli and American pilots learned from Redfa's jet. The half-donut test results were explicit. Quote, "The MiG-21 F-13 exhibits superior acceleration and climb performance, but rapidly loses energy in sustained turning engagements below 400 knots. Optimal engagement strategy is to force horizontal turns at low airspeed where the F-4 maintains energy advantage." End quote. That one paragraph changed how American pilots fought. Instead of trying to outclimb the MiG-21 or outrun it, they forced it to turn. And once the MiG was bleeding energy, they closed and killed. If you're a fighter pilot and you know your opponent's exact energy bleed rate in a sustained turn, how much of an advantage does that give you? And if you didn't have that information, how many more pilots would die learning it the hard way? Vietnam proved the doctrine. Between 1965 and 1967, before the half-donut results were disseminated, U.S. fighter pilots had a kill ratio against MiG-20s of roughly 2-to-1, not great. After 1968, when the half-donut results were integrated into training, the kill ratio jumped to 3-to-1. By 1972, it was 5-to-1. The MiG-21 didn't get worse. American pilots just got better at exploiting its weaknesses. And none of that happens without Redfa. Now here's the part of the story that raises uncomfortable questions. Because while the MiG-21 was being tested at Groom Lake, and while Israeli pilots were using the intelligence to shoot down Syrian jets, and while American pilots were learning how to win dogfights they would have lost, Redfa was sitting in a CIA safe house being debriefed. The debrief lasted 6 weeks. every detail of Iraqi Air Force operations, base security, maintenance procedures, pilot training, Soviet advisory presence communication protocols, everything. The debrief transcripts run to over 400 pages. Most of it remains classified. The sections that have been declassified are clinical cold. They read like an engineering manual, because that's what Redfa had become. Not a pilot, not a defector, a data source. And when the debrief was over, when the CIA had extracted every piece of useful intelligence, they gave him a new name and sent him to California. Was that the deal he signed up for? Or did he expect something different? The Mossad recruitment pitch, according to the declassified operational summary, included 3 promises: $1 million, citizenship for him and his family, and protection. The money was paid. The citizenship was granted. But the protection? That's harder to quantify. Because if Redfa spent 30 years living under an assumed name, never speaking publicly, never writing a memoir, never even attending a reunion with the pilots who flew his jet in the test program, was that protection? Or was that isolation? What happened to the $1 million? Did Redfa actually receive it? And if he did, why did he spend his later years running a gas station? Let me tell you what we know about Redfa's financial situation, because it's not what you'd expect from a man who was supposedly paid $1 million in 1966. According to public records obtained through FOIA requests related to the CIA relocation program, Redfa received a lump sum payment of $100,000 in 1967, not $1 million, 1/10 of that. Where did the rest go? The Mossad operational budget summary for 1966 to 1967, partially declassified in 2019, lists Operation Diamond total cost at $1,150,000. That includes recruitment expenses, travel costs, family extraction, logistical support, and asset compensation. The asset compensation line item is listed as $100,000. So either the CIA lied about the amount, or the Mossad lied to Redfa about the amount, or someone along the way decided that 10% was close enough. If you were Redfa, and you risked everything on the promise of $1 million, and you received 1/10 of that, would you complain? And if you did complain, who would you complain to? The answer is no one, because the moment Redfa landed that MiG at Hatzor, he lost all leverage. He couldn't go back to Iraq. He couldn't go public without violating the terms of his CIA relocation agreement. And he couldn't exactly sue the Mossad for breach of contract. He took what they gave him, and he stayed quiet. That's the cost of defection that no one talks about, not the danger, not the risk, the leverage. Once you cross the line, you're entirely dependent on the people who recruited you. And if they decide to renegotiate the deal, you have no recourse. Did that happen to Redfa? We can't prove it, but the financial records suggest it, and the fact that he spent the last 30 years of his life running a gas station instead of living comfortably on $1 million payout suggests something went wrong. Or maybe the gas station was a cover. Maybe the money was placed in trust. Maybe Redfa was smarter than the records indicate and decided to live modestly to avoid attention. We'll never know, because he never talked. The $1 million appears to have been a recruitment exaggeration. Declassified Mossad accounting records indicate Redfa received $100,000 in 1967 and an additional $25,000 in 1973 as a retention bonus to prevent him from speaking publicly about the operation. Total compensation, $125,000. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $1.2 million in 2025 dollars. Significant, but not the fortune he was promised. Let me give you another angle to consider, because there's one more person in this story who deserves attention, and that's the other recruitment target, the one who said no, Lieutenant Hamid Dahe. We covered his death earlier, but let's think about what his decision actually meant. He was approached by Mossad, same pitch as Redfa, same promises, and he refused, not because he loved Iraq, not because he believed in the regime, but because he understood the cost. He knew that defection meant losing everything, his identity, his country, his future, and he decided it wasn't worth it. 3 weeks later, he was dead. Now, I'm not going to tell you that Mossad killed him. The evidence is circumstantial. The autopsy is questionable. The power outage is suspicious, but circumstantial evidence isn't proof, and I'm not in the business of speculation. What I will tell you is this: Hamid Dahe made a choice. He chose loyalty over survival, and whether that choice killed him or whether he killed himself because he couldn't live with the pressure of being a recruitment target, the result is the same. He's dead. And Redfa is dead. And the only difference is that one of them got 30 extra years. Was it worth it? If you were given the choice between 30 years of life in hiding or dying with your integrity intact, which would you choose? And what does your answer say about how you value loyalty versus survival? I want you to think about that, and I want you to leave your answer in the comments, because this is the kind of question that defines how you see the world. There's no right answer, just your answer. Now let's talk about the aftermath, because Operation Diamond didn't just change the outcome of one war. It changed how intelligence agencies thought about strategic asset acquisition. Before Redfa, defections were opportunistic. You waited for someone to approach you. After Redfa, defections became operational. You identified the target, you cultivated them. You controlled the timeline. The CIA took notes. The Mossad refined the playbook. And over the next 2 decades, dozens of Soviet and Warsaw Pact pilots were approached using the same methodology. Some defected, some refused, and some ended up like Hamid Dahe. The most successful operation after Redfa was in 1976, when Soviet pilot Viktor Belenko defected with a MiG-21 Foxbat to Japan. The CIA and Japanese intelligence debriefed him, analyzed the jet, and discovered that the MiG-21 wasn't the super fighter everyone feared. It was fast, it could fly high, but the avionics were crude, the engines were brute force, and the airframe was made of steel, not titanium, which meant it was heavy and slow to maneuver. The MiG-21 mystique died the day Belenko landed. Redfa showed that defections could be operationalized. Belenko showed they could be repeated. But here's the question no one asks. How many pilots were approached and refused? How many ended up dead in suspicious circumstances? How many lived the rest of their lives wondering if the next car accident, the next heart attack, the next random mugging was actually an intelligence operation? We'll never know, because the recruitment attempts that fail don't get declassified, they get buried. And the targets who refuse don't get protection, they get watched. And sometimes they disappear. That's the shadow side of intelligence operations. The part that doesn't make it into the declassified documents. The part that sits in sealed files marked "Do Not Declassify." Which matters more in the end? The intelligence gained, or the lives destroyed to gain it? And if you can't answer that question, who should? Let's bring this full circle. Because we started with a MiG-21 on a flight line in Iraq, and we need to end with what that jet actually accomplished. Here's the scorecard. 1 defection, 1 aircraft, 62 Israeli test flights, 130 US test flights. Tactical doctrine that saved hundreds of American lives in Vietnam combat intelligence that gave Israel decisive air superiority in 1967. And an intelligence methodology that was used for the next 50 years. On the other side of the ledger, one pilot's life destroyed, one co-pilot's death under suspicious circumstances. Dozens of Christian pilots grounded, an entire recruitment network exposed and rolled up by Iraqi intelligence. And a family that grew up knowing their father was the man who betrayed his country. Was it worth it? I can't answer that for you. I can only show you the evidence and let you decide. But here's what I know. Warfare isn't just kinetic. It's not just bombs and bullets. It's intelligence. It's understanding your enemy better than they understand themselves. And sometimes that understanding comes from someone on the inside who decides the cost of staying is higher than the cost of leaving. Munir Redfa made that calculation. And whether you call him a traitor or a hero depends entirely on which side of the line you're standing on. Final question for the comments. If Redfa's defection saved hundreds of American and Israeli lives, but destroyed dozens of Iraqi Christian pilots' careers and possibly got Hamid Dahe killed, was the moral cost worth the tactical gain? Give me your answer and the reason behind it. Before we close out, I want to remind you that investigations like this, digging through declassified documents, tracking down obscure operational summaries, verifying timelines against archived records, take time and resources. If you want to support this kind of deep research, the link is in the description below. It's how I keep these stories coming. No pressure. But if you're here because you value truth over propaganda, consider it. All right, let's wrap this up with one final piece of the puzzle. Because there's one document that ties this whole story together, and it wasn't declassified until 2018. It's a CIA memo dated September 1966. Subject line, Operational Assessment, Diamond. The memo is 4 pages. 3 of those pages are still redacted, but the 4th page has 1 paragraph visible. And that paragraph changes how you think about everything we've covered. Quote, Asset Redfa has provided intelligence value exceeding initial operational projections. Recommend extension of protective custody protocols and continued financial support contingent on non-disclosure compliance assessment. Concludes that secondary recruitment attempts within Iraqi Air Force are inadvisable due to heightened security posture. DHAHE incident demonstrates increased risk profile. Operational methodology remains sound. Future target selection should prioritize lower-profile assets with reduced exposure risk. DHAHE incident demonstrates increased risk profile. The CIA knew. They knew Hamid Dahe died under suspicious circumstances. They knew it was connected to the recruitment attempt, and their conclusion wasn't stop recruiting. It was recruit smarter. That's the reality of intelligence work. Lives are variables in a risk assessment. Dahi's death didn't stop the program. It refined the target selection criteria. And that's the last thing I'll leave you with. Because the story of Operation Diamond isn't just about one pilot and one jet. It's about the machinery of intelligence work, the way human lives are calculated, leveraged, and expended in service of strategic objectives. The way one man's desperate escape becomes another nation's decisive advantage, and the way history remembers the defection but forgets the defector. Munir Redfa flew a MiG-21 out of Iraq on 20 minutes of fuel and a promise. He lived 30 more years under a name that wasn't his, and he died in obscurity while the jet he stole became a legend. That's not a happy ending, but it's an honest one. If you made it this far, drop a comment with your take on the whole operation. Was Redfa a hero or a traitor? Was the intelligence worth the human cost? And if you were in his position, what would you have done? I read every comment, and the best debates happen when people bring sources and argue with evidence, not emotion. Next time, we're opening another black box, another story they tried to bury, another aircraft with secrets that changed history. Until then, remember, every aircraft has a story. We recover them.